why is it when you and I go to play Coldplay song Yellow using the standard correct chords, it sounds like this? Look at the stars, see how they shine for you, and everything you do. But when you hear Coldplay's version, it sounds more like this. Look at the stars, see how they shine for you, and everything you do. By the way, did any of you also notice how ironic it is that we're talking about Coldplay today and I sound like Chris Martin today? Gotta love that. Welcome back to another video. I'm Marcus with IndieMusicLab.com. So in this video, I'm going to share a few tips on how to add color to your chord progressions on both keys and guitar. Alright, so as I continue to make videos here on YouTube, I want to do a better job of giving you guys resources that directly relate to the content at hand. And so today I have a free downloadable PDF with a bunch of stuff in it that is directly related to what we're talking about. So the first thing in this PDF will be visuals of all the chord shapes for both keys and guitar of all the chords that I'm playing throughout this video. So you'll be able to apply them immediately and you'll be able to see exactly what I'm playing to make these chords happen. Also, I added in a link for a free 20-minute music theory crash course, as well as a PDF to go along with that as well, because if you don't really have the basic knowledge of music theory, you know, like major chords versus minor chords, major scale, number system, etc., then you're gonna have a hard time following along with everything that I say, because from here on out, I'm gonna assume that you know what I'm talking about when I say a 6 minor chord, for example. Alright, so the first big way to make your chord progressions more interesting and colorful, and didn't save this for last, this is the most important thing, and that is the sustained note technique. Now first off, there's something very important that you need to think about when it comes to making your chord progressions more colorful, and what exactly does that entail? Like, what does that look like? It looks like this. No, I'm not kidding. I'm being serious. Let me explain. So again, I'm going to go ahead and play the chord progression for Yellow like I did at the intro of this video, but I'm not going to use the sustained note technique. I'm going to do just standard, boring, you know. We've heard that a million times. We don't need that chord progression again and again with no color. It's so boring, right? Now, here's what Yellow sounds like with the sustained note technique added, and I want you to pay attention to one note in particular, this one. Pay attention to this note the entire time that I'm playing this chord progression. Watch. Did you notice that? Notice how this third, we're in the key of B major here, so it's 1, 2, 3. It's the third note of the B major scale. That note is ringing the entire time. This is the sustained note technique. You pick a note and you just make sure that that note is playing throughout the entirety of the chord progression, or at least most of the time. Now, why is this so powerful? Why does this sound so much better than this? Sounds so much better, but why? Well, one reason is because if everything moves, right? It's like you're just moving, you're just bouncing around from one chord to the next, and there's nothing really connecting them together. But when you have a note that acts as almost like the balancing note, right? It stays consistent and it's like holding the tension in the middle while everything around it is moving. Right? So you have the chord moving around. It's going from the B to the F sharp, except this note stays there. So, and then as it goes to the E major, that stays there as well, making it an E major 7. Now, did you notice how I didn't even mention the chord names until now when I said this was an E major 7, right? The reason for that is I don't think that that's the correct thing to focus on. At least not at first, because what is the one thing that we know is true about this chord progression is the third it rings out. And instead of thinking like, okay, B major, and then this would be like an F sharp add 6 going to an E major 7. It's like, okay, that's fair enough. But isn't it a lot easier to think of it as, you know, 1, 5, 4, but then we're going to introduce the tension by playing a sustained note by holding out that third, letting the third ring no matter what chord is being played. And then as a byproduct of that, you'll get these really colorful chords. Do you notice how I'm changing the terminology of what I'm focusing on at the top, right? What I'm valuing the most, and that is the sustained note technique matters more than all the individual chord names that come as a consequence of the sustained note technique. Now, the sustained note for yellow is obviously the third in the key of B. However, that's not the only note that you have at your disposal. My second favorite note that I want to talk about now is by sustaining the 5. So to illustrate a sustained 5, let's go to the chord progression for Sky Full of Stars, which is, right? And what's happening here is, so we're in the key of F sharp major, right? And so the fifth note would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, if you're not understanding what I'm doing here when it comes to 1, 5, 6, download the free PDF in the description and make sure you have an understanding of like the number system and the major scale. And once you have those basic music theory fundamentals, it makes such a difference, and it just helps you to understand the nature of chords and why certain chords are the way that they are. Anyway, let's move on. Now, there's a sneaky thing that's happening in this chord progression for Sky Full of Stars. Notice how it's not like this. That kind of sounds okay, right? But it doesn't sound quite as strong as this. Listen. How am I getting that sound, that strength that just came in there? It's the 5. And because this progression starts on the 6 minor, that makes it a dominant 7 chord. But again, this keeps ringing out through the entirety of the chord progression. Right here. Right? That's beautiful. So using the third and the fifth, I think are going to be your best two options, and this will help you make your chord progressions immediately. With the snap of a finger, you implement this, try sustaining the third and try sustaining the fifth on different songs. You're going to notice a huge difference. It's going to glue your chord progressions together, and it's going to add beautiful color to your progressions. Then once you master that, obviously you can start experimenting with sustaining like the 2 or the 6 or the 7, or just sustaining it for 90% of the time and maybe resolve it for the last chord of every bar. That happens a lot on like the 5 chord, where if it starts here to the 6, 4, 1, 5. So if it's like, right, it resolves to the 5 chord. So that happens a lot, and that can be a great move. So you don't have to necessarily sustain that throughout the entirety. Again, you can play with this, and it can still really help to make your chord progressions sound colorful. All right, so the second thing I want to talk about to make your chord progressions more colorful is to use your vocal melodies in juxtaposition with the chord progression. Now, when it comes to the vocal melody, one very important thing we all need to understand is that the vocal melody is a part of the chord progression, right? So that fact needs to be factored in. So if you're playing da 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 da, so what I'm doing is I'm creating these color chords not only with the instrument, but also with my voice. Now, I'm going to play the chord progression for Coldplay's song Higher Power, and pay attention to when we go to the 4 chord. I'll point it out when we get there. Yeah, you've got a higher power, got me singing every second, dancing every hour. Now, when I listen to this chorus, to me the most interesting chord, the most interesting part is when it goes to that 4 chord. So it's, you've got a higher power, got me singing every second. Right? What's happening there is I am playing, so I'm in the key of F major, and then this is the 4 chord, it's a B flat major. It's actually a B flat major 9, because we're also doing the C here. But the vocal melody, see, here's where it gets interesting. The vocal melody is playing this A note, right? The vocal melody is playing an A. We're not playing that in the chord progression. Got me singing every second, dancing every hour. So that third is very much the key note that's being sung there, and it's juxtaposed to that 4, that B flat 9. and then this is being sung in the melody. It's beautiful. It creates that tension. Do you notice that? It creates that tension. It's not this boring like da 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 da. So the next time you're writing a song and you're writing a chord progression, here is one thing I want you to think about. And this is a little hard to explain, but I'm going to try. So what you want to do is kind of do the opposite of what you want to do. And here's what I mean. So if you're playing a song and you're just like, you know what, I'm just feeling really resolved. I just want to, you know, just relax. Where did I hear that before? The problem is I'm not really feeling any tension because I'm doing exactly what I want to do in the moment, right? There's no tension there between myself and the instrument. But what if you said, okay, I want to be resolved, so therefore I'm not going to. I'm going to add more tension. So right? Just something like that where you create that tension with the melody and you're consciously trying to not align yourself perfectly with whatever the chord progression is doing. Now conversely, the same is also true. So if you're singing and you're just like, man, I just feel really tense, I want all the color I can get, right? Then if that's what you're feeling, do the opposite of that and be much more resolved. So like I said, it's a hard thing to explain. This is just something that you have to feel. It's a muscle that you need to practice where you find the tension, right? You want to feel like you're a little bit at odds between you and the instrument. It's not like uniform, because uniform sounds boring. Yeah, 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 yeah. Now obviously you still want it to sound good and really go together and have some really pleasing tones to it, but you want it to feel just ever so slightly asymmetrical. And when it comes to tension, a little bit goes a long ways. Like we talked about earlier, often it's just one note. Everything else about the chord progression stays the same, except you're sustaining one note, like the third or the fifth or whatever other note you decide sounds good using that technique. All right, now before I go, just as a thank you for sticking around to the end of this video, here's just a little trick that I think is really cool, and it again has to do with the song Yellow by Coldplay. And it's a certain way of doing this on the guitar. So Yellow is in the key of B, right? So the standard might be to do just a standard B chord, you know, with a bar, and then F sharp, down to the E, right? But the problem is that's exactly the chords I was playing on the keyboard. That sounded really boring, that sounded dull, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to sound colorful. And when you listen to the guitars on Yellow, there's a lot of color in there, right? So how do we get that? Here's a little trick. The first thing you want to do, and keep in mind, this is in the key of B. So this specifically works really well for the key of B. What you want to do is take the high E string and tune it down a half a step. So just go down to D sharp. All right, now that your high E string is tuned down to a D sharp, now what we're going to do is use an E shape, which is, you know, this, right? Just a standard E shape, and we're gonna move that shape around, and it's the only shape we're going to use. So this is super easy, but we're gonna start all the way up here, and this is gonna be our B chord. This is our 1. And then how cool is that, right? It's so much more interesting than what I played earlier, and this is such a cool trick. And what's happening here is, have you been paying attention to when I said this is a D sharp? What was that note on the keyboard that we were sustaining on Yellow? You guessed it, it was a D sharp. So this is that same note on top that sustains throughout the entire chord progression. So again, right, so this is the first note. Again, I'm on the, what is this? 3, 5, 7, 9. I don't even know my fret numbers. You've got the E shape starting on the 8th. It's on the 8th and the 9th fret. And then move it down to here for your 5 chord, and then here for your 4 chord. It's beautiful. So now I learned this trick actually from just a random TikTok video or Instagram Reels video, because I'm not on TikTok, so it's probably Reels. and I have no idea who it was. So I want to give credit where credit is due. So if you know who that was, if you've also seen that, just leave a comment. That way I can shout out whoever I was that I learned this from. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope this was incredibly helpful for you. Again, if you haven't already, be sure to download the free PDF. It's in the description. I have all these chord shapes that I just did, these, as well as all of the other chords that I played throughout this video. So be sure to download that so you can really start implementing and learning from these Coldplay chords and then implement those into your own chord progressions and productions. All right, y'all have an amazing day. Thanks so much for watching. See ya.